Welcome to Geo Capitalist, where we decode global wealth, one map at a time. Go and grab your coffee, because what you're about to hear isn't just about Brexit. It's about a nation that made a choice and is now quietly trying to undo it. June 23, 2016. A date burned into the memory of an entire generation. The day Britain voted to leave the European Union, with promises of freedom, prosperity, and sovereignty. Take back control, they said. Reclaim our future. But oh boy, it's not what you think. Fast forward nearly a decade, and the dream is in pieces. Over 2 million jobs lost. The average Brit is $2,500 poorer per year. And instead of reducing immigration, the UK has welcomed over 4 million. New arrivals since Brexit, twice as many as in the previous 10 years. Now in 2025, nearly half of the population believes Britain should turn back to Europe as its main trade partner. Not the US, not China. The same EU it walked away from. So, what went wrong? In this video, we'll uncover the truth behind Britain's great political gamble. How a campaign built on sovereignty and control unraveled into chaos, regret, and economic decline. We'll show you why even former Leave voters are now asking, should we go back? And most importantly, could it actually happen? If you enjoy stories that connect geopolitics, economics, finance, and the deeper forces shaping our world, this channel was made for you. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. And let's make sense of this together. So the UK voted to leave the EU, but leave to where? That's the part nobody figured out. Brexit wasn't a strategy, it was a vibe. A big national mood swing dressed up as policy. And while take back control looked good on a bus, nobody actually agreed on what control meant. Some wanted a hard Brexit, cut all ties, burn the bridges, build new ones across the Atlantic. Others dreamed of a soft Brexit, keep the perks, ditch the rules. And then there were the Singapore-on-Thames crowd picturing London as a deregulated capitalist utopia floating in the North Sea. Spoiler, none of those happened. Instead, the UK wandered into a bureaucratic no-man's land. It took 5 years and 3 different governments just to get a Brexit deal passed. And by the end, nobody liked it. Not even the people who wrote it. And let's talk about that deal for a second. It killed free movement. It gave the UK the right to write its own rules. It stopped payments to the EU budget. Sounds good on paper, right? Except, it came at the cost of frictionless trade, especially with Europe, Britain's largest trading partner. Meaning most businesses now still follow EU regulations, just with more paperwork, more delays, and more costs. Brexit was supposed to be freedom, but what the UK got was independence with conditions. Like moving out of your parents' house, but still showing up every Sunday for laundry and leftovers. And that's the heart of the issue. The UK didn't just leave the EU, it left without knowing where it was going. Let's talk numbers, real ones. Since Brexit, UK exports to the EU have dropped by 11%, costing British businesses nearly $50 billion a year. That's not a dip. That's an economic nosebleed, and it hits small businesses the hardest. Companies that used to ship products across Europe in days now wrestle with customs delays, extra fees, and mountains of paperwork. Some gave up entirely. Others folded. Then there's the fishing industry, the poster child of the Take Back Control campaign. Remember those dramatic speeches about reclaiming our waters? Turns out you can't eat sovereignty. Seafood exports to Europe collapsed by 83% in the first month post-Brexit. Why? Because selling fish now means navigating more red tape than an MI6 agent in Moscow. For some coastal towns, Brexit didn't bring prosperity. It brought bankruptcy. And what about those shiny new trade deals we were promised? Well, in 2023, the UK finally struck a deal with Australia. It was called historic, groundbreaking, a post-Brexit triumph. It removed tariffs on about $5 billion worth of exports. Sounds impressive until you realize it added just 0.08% to GDP. That's not a game changer. That's rounding error. Here's the brutal truth. Brexit wasn't a stimulus. It was a slow puncture. And the economic pain isn't just abstract, it's personal. The average Brit is now $2,500 poorer per year, and public services are stretched thinner than ever. So yes, the UK got its independence. But it came with a receipt. And the return policy? Non-existent. Because when you rewrite your economy on a campaign slogan, you'd better be ready to explain what happens when the bill arrives. And oh boy, the bill has arrived. Now let's look closer behind the exit. The migration myth. Here's something fun to ponder. If Brexit was supposed to stop mass immigration, why is net migration now at its highest level in British history? In 2023 alone, 1.2 million people arrived in the UK. That's about 2% of the population in a single year, more than double the migration rates of the decade before Brexit. So what happened? Simple. The promise was fake. One of the loudest arguments for leaving the EU was to control our borders. And a big part of that fear machine was Turkey. Yes, Turkey. Pro-Brexit campaigns pushed the idea that Turkey was about to join the EU. And that meant 77 million Turks would have the right to move freely to Britain. The message? Leave now, or they're all coming. Of course, Turkey never joined, but the damage was done. The fear stuck. And migration became the centerpiece of a movement built on emotional panic instead of policy. Even tabloids joined the frenzy, turning migrants into monsters and headlines into weapons. And when voters walked into that polling booth in 2016, many weren't thinking about trade deals or GDP. They were thinking, close the gates. But here's the punchline. Leaving the EU didn't close the gates. It just changed who held the keys. Without free movement from Europe, the UK opened new visa routes to Asia, Africa, and beyond. And guess what? Migration surged. Not because of the EU, because of the UK's own post-Brexit policies. So if people voted to stop migration and it increased anyway, what exactly did they vote for? Maybe it was never about numbers. Maybe it was about narratives. And when the story falls apart, what's left? Oh boy. Go and grab some more coffee, because what's coming next is wild. To understand why the UK left the EU, you've got to understand something deeper. Britain never really felt like part of Europe in the first place. While France and Germany saw the EU as a peace project, born from the ashes of war, Britain saw it as a market. A convenience, a transaction. And that difference? It mattered, even back in 1973 when the UK joined what would become the European Union. It did so with one foot out the door. It wasn't about unity. It was about trade. The political stuff? That was always uncomfortable. Part of it comes down to identity. Britain is an island, literally and psychologically. It wasn't invaded during World War II. It didn't need continental integration to feel secure. Instead, its sense of power came from the empire, not the neighborhood. So when the EU evolved from a trading bloc into a political union with shared laws, shared courts, and yes, shared borders, Britain flinched. It never felt quite European. It felt British, and that gap widened over time. By the 1990s, Euroscepticism wasn't just a fringe movement, it was political fuel. Politicians like Nigel Farage turned anti-EU sentiment into mainstream momentum. The message? Brussels is telling us what to do. Let's take back our laws, our money, our country. But here's the irony. The further Britain pulled away from Europe, the more it realized how much it depended on it. Culturally, economically, strategically, it's like breaking up with someone you never really appreciated. Until you're out in the cold, and they're the only one who ever really had your back. Hold on to your hats, because you're in Geo Capitalist, where we uncover the world one map at a time, and it's about to get turbulent. When the UK left the EU, it didn't just walk away from trade deals. It walked away from powerful network. The kind that don't show up on spreadsheets but shape the future in real time. Let's start with education. The UK is home to 4 of the top 10 universities in the world: Cambridge, Oxford, Imperial, and UCL. But post-Brexit access to Horizon Europe, the EU's $100 billion research program was severed. British scientists lost funding, research partnerships dried up, and academic collaboration across the continent stalled. Next, technology. While the US and China are pouring hundreds of billions into AI and infrastructure, Europe is falling behind. And the UK? Caught in the middle. Too distant from Brussels, too small to compete alone, London could have been Europe's AI capital. Instead, it's playing catch-up while everyone else builds data centers the size of football stadiums. And here's where it gets messy. Diplomatically, the UK lost its seat at the EU table. It no longer influences the rules that still impact its economy. It's like quitting the group chat but still getting the notifications and not being allowed to reply. Some say this is the price of freedom. Others say it's the cost of self-sabotage. Because sovereignty sounds good until you realize power comes from partnership. And by cutting ties, Britain didn't just isolate itself from Europe, it isolated itself from global influence. The world didn't wait. The world moved on. So here we are, nearly a decade later. The economy is bleeding. The vision has faded. And for the first time in years, something has shifted. A recent poll shows that 59% of Brits now say they'd vote to rejoin the EU if a new referendum were held. That's not fringe, that's mainstream. Quiet conversations are turning into real questions. Could Britain go back? And yet, nobody in power wants to talk about it. Keir Starmer, the Labour Party leader, has already said, "We won't rejoin the EU." Not in my lifetime. Conservatives won't touch the idea either. For both parties, Brexit is radioactive. To challenge it is to relive the trauma and risk political suicide. But here's the twist. Politicians might not have a choice forever, because while Parliament stays silent, the public mood is loud. Businesses want access to the single market again. Students want back into EU programs. Scientists want to collaborate. Families want easier travel, dual citizenship, and a future that isn't defined by red tape. The EU? Cautious. Some leaders say, sure, you can come back, but not like before. Trust was broken. The UK slammed the door. Now reopening it won't be easy. And here's the real kicker. Rejoining the EU wouldn't erase the pain of Brexit. It wouldn't reverse the damage, but it might stop the bleeding. Still, this debate isn't really about policies or polls. It's about something deeper. What if the UK didn't just lose its trade deals? What if it lost its sense of direction? And what if, just maybe, the only way forward is going back? Coming up next, the UK's last big bet. One final shot at redemption through tech. Innovation and the dream of a Silicon Valley made in Britain. Here it is, the UK's last big swing. After nearly a decade of economic whiplash, political infighting, and broken promises, the government has unveiled its golden ticket. The London-Oxford-Cambridge Tech Corridor, a bold plan to create a British Silicon Valley fueled by deregulation, investment incentives, and post-Brexit freedoms. The vision? Turn Britain into a global tech powerhouse. The reality? It's a race against time. Because while the UK is just laying foundations, the US and China are building empires. America has already committed $500 billion to AI data centers. China is rolling out AI models like DeepSeek, driving innovation at breakneck speed. Europe? Falling behind. And Britain? Caught in between, hoping to leapfrog from political recovery to technological relevance, with no room for error. It's an ambitious project. And to be fair, the UK has the ingredients. 4 of the world's top universities. A highly skilled financial sector. English as a global tech language. But infrastructure is just one part of the equation. The real question is, can it lead? Because leadership isn't just about flashy investments. It's about direction. Confidence. A story people believe in. And that's what the UK has been missing. For years, it's been reacting to crisis after crisis, never quite choosing who it wants to be. Is it a global trade hub? A nationalist stronghold? A European neighbor? This tech corridor might be the last chance to rewrite the narrative. But here's the loop. If this fails, if Britain squanders this window, the calls to rejoin the EU won't just grow louder. They'll become inevitable. And maybe, just maybe, the final chapter of Brexit won't be independence. It'll be reconciliation. Coming up, we will talk about the ending no one saw coming and the question that might haunt Britain for decades. So, what now? The slogans have faded. The headlines moved on. The world kept spinning. But here in the UK, something still lingers. Something no one wants to name out loud. Regret. Because Brexit wasn't just a political shift. It was a psychological fracture. Families split. Friendships ended. A nation chose pride over partnership, and it's been paying the price ever since. And yet, the conversation is back. Quiet, awkward, fragile, but real. Could we rejoin? It won't be easy. The EU has changed. So has the UK. There would be conditions, compromises, maybe even consequences. But here's the truth. Countries evolve. And sometimes growth looks like having the courage to admit you were wrong. Rejoining wouldn't be a return to the past. It would be a step into something new, an attempt to heal, to rebuild, to reconnect. Not just with Europe, but with ourselves. Because maybe the real reason the UK wants to rejoin the EU isn't just about trade or travel or treaties. Maybe it's about redemption. Maybe after a decade of division, what people want most isn't freedom or control, it's clarity. A sense of belonging, a future that makes sense. And if that means turning back toward the place we once walked away from, then maybe it's not weakness. Maybe it's wisdom. Brexit was supposed to define a generation, but what if the story isn't over? What if the next chapter begins where the last one broke apart? This is Geo Capitalist, where we uncover the world one map at a time. And sometimes the journey home begins when you finally admit you're lost. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, imagine what else is hidden behind the headlines. Subscribe to the channel and join us every week as we map the forces shaping our world, one story at a time. This may be the real reason the UK wants to rejoin the EU, and why it might actually happen. Thanks for watching, and we'll see